Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod, where we amplify voices from across the agricultural industry. We aggregate those perspectives and work to elevate our collective thinking around strategy execution. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and I'm so happy you chose to spend your time with us today. Now, as we've talked about exhaustively on this show, co-ops are facing some very challenging conditions in the present environment. Things like higher costs of fuel, labor, freight, even repair and maintenance activities within the facilities, disrupted global demand for U.S. agricultural production, the rapidly changing customer needs around precision application and all the fleet, hardware, and the enabling technology that's required to bring those world-class services and capabilities to the farm. And even local supply and demand factors have been impacted from the proliferation of more processing businesses, new and renovated facilities that are being built and brought online in co-ops' traditional trade areas. And yes, these create steady demand for the co-ops throughout the year, but they also interrupt and reduce some of that origination volume with local producers that co-ops have historically had the first access and first rights to. So there's a lot that comes with trying to lead a profitable agricultural cooperative business these days. But you might notice that most of these factors I mentioned are externally driven, right? Conditions and trends that are outside of the co-op, but exert a force on the business. And because they're external, you largely have to react to and compete around or through them. And it's really important that we talk about those things and we share insights, we share leading practices, we share different ways of thinking about how to overcome them. But we also can't lose sight of the fact that there are internal challenges as well. Internal challenges that co-op boards and management and executive teams have outsized ability to influence and control and improve. When I think about a conventional co-op today, I wouldn't say that most co-ops have a strategy problem. They might have some strategy deficiencies or execution opportunities, but they don't have core strategy problems. What they often have are an undiagnosed alignment and a divergence problem. So let's consider for the moment this myth, which you will often hear, is that ultimately all of our members want the same thing. We might not say it often. We might not say it at all explicitly. But the way that the co-ops are often organized and the way that they operate the businesses says that loud and clear. Our members want the same thing. The reality is quite different. And I'm sure many of you are already nodding your head, but let me give you some examples. And these are going to be painfully generalized, so forgive me for that. But large farms, large farming operations typically want scale, speed, and margin. That's what they're looking for in their operations. Smaller to medium farms often more heavily weight service and access and stability in what they're looking for from the co-op. And then we start to think further afield into next generation growers, that next cohort of folks that are taking over the farm or buying into farming operations or looking to make a living and make a go of it within agriculture. They often want digital solutions. They want transparency in how the organization's being run and what the supply chain looks like. And they want optionality in how they do their work. Conversely, to those next generation growers, you look back to your legacy members, they often just want fairness. They value tradition. They expect predictability. And this fragmentation, this divergence among your membership base, your grower base, causes real problems. The challenge is also that the fragmentation is accelerating. It accelerates as the capital intensity of the business increases. It accelerates as the requirements for technology adoption and the investments associated with that increase. The fragmentation accelerates as different perspectives on risk. We all know that different people at different seasons of their career, different cycles of the business have different appetite for risk, and that fragmentation shows up. And then the mere consolidation among farmers and producers also, in many ways, can accelerate the fragmentation. So if you're not sure this is an issue for your co-op, if what I've just said to you doesn't ring true or familiar or promising at all, ask yourself one question. And imagine sitting with your board or sitting with your executive team. If you had to pick one member segment to optimize for today, who would it be? And by doing that, who would you disappoint? My guess is that if you actually did ask that question in your next offsite, your next management team meeting, your next board retreat or monthly board meeting, what one member segment are we optimizing for and who are we going to most likely disappoint? If you stood in front of people and asked that question and took a tally of their answers, you're going to get many different answers. And you're also going to have some people who might not be able to answer that question at all. And this is what we're going to talk about today: the member segmentation and, frankly, member misalignment challenge that's facing co-ops today. I want to talk about why this happens, share some ideas of what I think you should be doing about it, what you can expect as you get into the work of looking at how do we create more clarity around who our members are, who we're here to optimally serve, and what the trade-offs are going to be, what you can expect from that work, and ultimately what good looks like. I think we all have an intuitive feeling of what it looks like, but we should probably put some meat on the bones and talk about that. Now, a very brief detour before jumping into today's topic. If you want to support this show and the work that we do here every week, please consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a new episode. We drop them every Wednesday, and you can do it right now on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're so inclined, at the end of today's discussion and episode, please consider leaving us a review on your podcast player. It really helps boost the show. It helps get these episodes and topics in front of more people in our industry, and it promotes the important work of agribusiness generally. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Now, let's start with, why does this happen? Why does member alignment break down in agricultural co-ops? I think we owe it to members to diagnose the real causes and not just talk about the symptoms. Here are some common failure modes that I observe. One of perhaps the prevailing root cause is the "we want to be everything to everyone" syndrome, right? We're not going to dig deep into why that's problematic, but I think we all know, when you name it, if you're trying to be everything to everyone, you're going to create a lot of confusion within the market. Who are you here to serve? You're going to create confusion within the employee base. What are their priorities? What are the segments that they can focus on to drive real growth? How is success being measured? It's also going to create all sorts of tension among your different business lines, in the ways that you allocate capital. It has a bunch of knock-on effects. And so I think the everything to everyone syndrome is one of the primary drivers of member alignment breakdown. We also have a phenomenon now where, historically, patronage was a very attractive vehicle, a very attractive value proposition for the co-op, and that's been eroding somewhat with the generational changes in the farm gate. We also have patronage and pricing systems within the co-ops that unintentionally cross-subsidize some of the less profitable, less strategic business lines, right? When you have that happening, it's going to flow through into some challenges around member alignment when you actually have some businesses that are very profitable subsidizing some that are maybe less strategic, less profitable. One of the biggest things that members experience from the co-op is, of course, its physical locations. Whether that's a fertilizer shed, it's a grain elevator, it's a feed mill, whatever it is, it's where they pick up their propane or have their propane delivered. The assets associated with your business are a big part of the face of the organization. And we know that we have legacy assets within not just the co-op system, but heavily within the co-op system, that are optimized for yesterday's member mix, right? Smaller modes of transportation, folks with less appetite to drive longer distances, historically smaller farming units producing lower yields, such that a smaller country elevator with a slow single leg could keep up with local demand. And if you missed this, we talked a lot about ag's asset problem back in episodes 111 and later on in 128, which you can go back and check out if you missed those and you're interested. Another reason this happens is we also have boards that are just frankly trying to preserve harmony instead of making those tough trade-offs. Co-op boards are in a very unique situation where they are customers of the business, they're member owners of the business, they are community leaders, they are community members. And so while they're trying to make the best decisions around what does the organization need for the future from a governance perspective, they also have to live directly with the consequences of their decisions. Every day when they are at the gas station, at the grocery store, at church, wherever it is, they are confronted daily with the outcomes of their decisions. And so boards that are trying to preserve that harmony and indirectly maybe avoiding some tough trade-offs, they're looking to impart fairness in the process, right? It's actually a positive intent. We want to be fair. We don't want to exclude a certain member group to the benefit of another one. We don't want to imply explicitly or implicitly that one member group is more important to us than another, even if that might actually be true. And they also, sometimes the boards are simply lacking the tools or maybe even the conviction required to confidently make those tough calls that reflect trade-offs. So how does this show up? So this some of this misalignment that I just talked about. We talked about some of the root causes there, but what are some of the symptoms? Well, I often see one of the first symptoms is fights around capital allocation, right? When the business is unclear around where we should be spending precious capital, and there's a lot of fights among that, and we're trying to be fair in the distribution of capital as opposed to strategic, that tells me that we might not have line of sight to the most strategic levers of growth for the business, which is then derived from what are the most strategic, growth-oriented member segments that we're looking to serve. Service complaints, the nature of service complaints. If you have service complaints that are all of one particular type, one particular nature, one particular sort of root cause, that's one thing. Perhaps you have a performance deficiency you can dig into and resolve for. But if you have service complaints across the board, we're too slow, you're not open enough, we're spending all this money in ways that don't value me or benefit my business. If you have a wide distribution of service complaints, that can be indicative of some challenges and opportunities around membership alignment. Talent burnout, of course, is going to be one of the symptoms, and also death by exception in operations. A business that is optimized for a particular segment of customer, that is serving many different profiles of customer, but is actually designed to serve a certain profile, is one that'll have much fewer exceptions, and then that flows through to much more efficient operations. So the key question I actually want you guys to ask yourselves here is, where are we already picking winners and losers? And maybe just not admitting it, right? You might be picking the winners are all of your members, in which case the loser is going to be the co-op, because it's excessively difficult, if not impossible, to run a sustainably profitable, consistently growing, and frankly, healthy work environment for your employees in a business that is looking to prioritize and serve the needs of every segment of growers. Now, if you're actually in a position where you are making those decisions around, you've picked some winners and some losers, then I think you're probably ahead of the curve. But for those that see opportunity in this, let's talk about, if you've got this challenge around a member alignment issue, what might you do about it? Now, the good news is this is a solvable problem. The challenge is that it requires a very heavy, burdensome lift to get it done. The action that you need to take is to segment your members, but you need to do it like a business, not like a club. And this is where, for all those reasons I just mentioned, for the board members, but also for the management team who actually will lead the segmentation process. Boards don't do this. Management teams do it. Boards will then maybe opine on it and endorse or challenge. But this is where co-ops and things get very uncomfortable. The core idea I want to drive home here is that member alignment, and meaning alignment around who are we here to serve, how are we serving them, how are we going to help them grow, and by virtue of that, help the co-op grow and be successful. It starts with explicit segmentation, not an exercise of vague averages and vague characteristics. Some of the segmentation lenses that I've seen co-ops use when they've been very successful in this process is, first and foremost, just looking at the scale of operations. And you can cut that with multiple different denominators. You could look at bushels that they produce. You could look at acres that they farm. You could look at the volume that they put through the co-op. But it's a lens of scale. What is the scale of our growers? You can look at profitability, right? one, how profitable are these growers generally, which is sort of a proxy for how well they run their farming operation. And profitability is going to be relative to their neighbors. So if it's a depressed farm economy, you should still see better run operations outperform those that are less well run, even if ultimately profitability is not very attractive. You're looking at profitability on a relative basis. So profitability, not just volume and scale, is really important. You can look at the growth trajectory. Is this a segment that we think will be bigger in 10 years, will be stagnant, or will be smaller? And every geography, every trade area, every line of business, right? Growth trajectory, if you're looking at it through a feed lens versus an agronomy lens, might look very different. But growth trajectory is a really important one. Getting clear on the service intensity required to serve that producer profile, right? Some folks we talked about in the beginning are looking for scale and speed. Other folks are looking for a lot of specialty and support and hands-on activities. There's no right or wrong answers here, but you do need to be clear-eyed around what is the service intensity required for us to actually meet this grower's needs or this member profile's needs.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
And the final one, and this is where perhaps the discomfort becomes most acute, is what is the strategic relevance of this member profile, this member segment, to the co-op's future? And this is where I think it really starts to put a lot of very sharp pressure on the values that we have in the cooperative system, a value of shared prosperity, a value of pooling our local demand for inputs, and then our local output of production and volume. We pool that as a way to create leverage, create opportunities, create more prosperity, and then share that prosperity among the member groups. But when you start to ask the question, who's strategically relevant to our future, that starts to run headlong into that older or original operating model. And I'm not saying that they can't coexist, but there is to be fair, there's a certain ruthlessness in saying who's strategically relevant to our future versus who's our neighbor and in our trade area. And that's, I think, again, one of the reasons that this gets very uncomfortable. But just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean you don't have to do it. The hard truth is that not all members are equally strategic. And pretending otherwise is just going to destroy your ability to execute the business. Admitting that they're not all equally strategic does not mean that you don't stand up and serve the less strategic segments. But the way you do it, the type of support you provide them, the boundaries that you set for the less strategic, those will have an outsized impact on your ability to grow in the future. Less is more. And so while it's uncomfortable, again, I really call you all to action to think about, are we being explicit in saying who is strategic to our future and who are well positioned to support and grow, and then creating that alignment throughout the organization. Now, how do you actually do this work? Once the willingness to start this kind of uncomfortable exercise is established, and once the commitment to see it through to conclusion is there, the mechanics of segmentation are relatively easy. I mean, we're not going to talk ad nauseum about these today, but you could do something as simple as a 2x2 4-quadrant graph, where one axis is strategic importance from low to high, and then the other axis is something like cost to serve, which is low to high. Right? There's a number of different ways you can cut this up and sort of look at what's the different angles of attack on this. But you want to talk about, okay, what are the services and pricing and attention that should differ by segment, right? What should a larger producer in our area expect in terms of service and pricing and attention from us versus a smaller one? Side note here, I don't want to get distracted, but one of the things that I've seen happen time and again is at the moment we start saying, what should our larger producers expect that maybe our smaller ones can't expect from us at this time? That usually puts in motion over investment plans. It could be, the speed at the scale, unloading leg, pooling more demand for better input pricing leverage. There's a variety of different ways that kind of focus on the larger operator flows through into the co-op and the agribusinesses model. What's interesting is once those investments are made on behalf of the larger member profile, all the benefits of those investments, they accrue to the entirety of your membership base. So even if you're investing $100,000 to upgrade the receiving leg at one of your workhorse facilities for the peak of harvest, and you're doing it because there's large producers that can absolutely just turn on the fire hydrant of grain, and you've got to be able to dump those trucks and get those trucks back to the farm as quickly as possible. You got to improve your put through. Maybe you do it and it pencils because of the growth of that large member segment, but they're not the only ones going through the pit. All those small growers are going to benefit from that same leg upgrade too. And so that's where I think you can also give yourself some comfort that focusing on serving the large growers in this context doesn't mean you're neglecting or forgetting about the smaller operators. So you need to pan back sometimes and think about what are the long-term impacts of the things that we'll be doing. But also, as you think about segmentation, you also need to think about the generational transitions that are happening within your trade area. These things are happening concurrently to all the other issues we've been talking about, and how the fundamental needs and desires of different cohorts are going to impact segmentation. Right? If some folks want to be able to walk into the scale house and discuss their tickets with a clerk, okay. If some folks say, no, I want a handheld solution so I can assign loads to drivers on the phone, and they're going to be able to give you the reference number when they pull onto the scale. There's different. You need to think about the shifting needs and expectations of these growers as well, often derived from generational transitions that are happening. Now, what can you expect if you do this work? Right? The so what, Joe? I get it. It sounds like member alignment, member misalignment, and divergence is a challenge for us. I hear you when you say we need to segment our growers, but what's going to actually happen? This is actually the heart of the matter. This is why I want to talk about it today. You can't optimize for everyone. And if you optimize for specific segments, you will be confronted with trade-offs. And those real trade-offs are going to surface very, very quickly. Things like, are we going to become an operation focused on speed or inclusivity? Are we going to look at capital efficiency and being incredibly smart and disciplined around how we spend money? Or are we going to be focused on geographic coverage and trying to really own this territory and attract every bushel from every type of grower in the area? Are we focused on innovation and really changing the way we do business? Or are we going to be a business that focuses on stability, honoring the way we've done it in the past, and do what we know we've proven to do well in the future? Neither one of these are right or wrong, just an example of trade-offs. Another one of the trade-offs that's going to emerge is, are you going to optimize for short-term member returns in the forms of patronage and distribution? Or are you going to be focused on long-term viability and heavily reinvesting in the organization? Implementing what comes out of the member segmentation. When you look at that and you say, okay, what does this require us to do? What does this tell us we should do? Implementing this is not just a technical exercise. It also has a culture and behavioral change component at all levels of the organization on how you operate. And we can't possibly break all this down today. And every co-op's going to have a unique change impact and set of actions that are specific to them. But you will get a flavor for what this means by asking yourself one question. Think about the organization today. What member behaviors are we actively encouraging with today's model? And after you get to the other side of the segmentation exercise and you maybe have a different view on who you should be optimizing for, who you want to serve, what member behaviors and employee behaviors are going to be required to stand up and execute tomorrow's model? Remember that the goal here is to get clear on who you're serving. And you don't really want to let the fragmented and divergent interests of your customers, your members, cripple the business. I'm going to say that again. Get clear on who you're serving. If you're not clear on who you're serving, then that fragmentation, that divergence of interests, the different needs and expectations of your different member groups, they're going to create friction and slow you down. Being clear on who you're there to serve is not easy. It's not conflict free. But when it is clear and when you have alignment, you can move fast. Couple of points on alignment here. Alignment, is not consensus. So don't go into this work expecting that eventually everyone will see the light, that eventually everyone will be on board, and they'll not just sign on to the strategy at the management team offset. They won't just endorse it at the board retreat, but they will also provide full-throated support outside of the room. That's just not going to happen. There's going to be dissent, and that's okay. It's okay. But once you've made the decision, once you've heard the dissenting votes, once you've gotten folks to say, okay, I know you don't 100% agree, but this is what we're deciding to do, it creates the clarity that the organization needs. And when the clarity is there, the consistency can follow. Again, to state what I said earlier, there will be winners and losers. If you fail to recognize and act on that, there won't be winners and losers. There'll only be losers. The co-op will lose. Your members will lose, regardless of what segment that they might fall into. So finally, if you get through this, when you get through this, what does good look like? This is all pretty tough stuff, and it's important that we bring clarity and some hope to the matter. Some signs of real member alignment in the organization is that you have clear member value propositions by segment. So again, you might select your most strategic segment, but you will have multiple segments, right? We all serve multiple profiles of customer. And what's important is that you have a clear sense of what is your value proposition to that segment. What are the things that you do, even if it's maybe you're not the perfect co-op as how that segment would want you to operate. But that's never been the objective. It shouldn't have been the objective, right? But what are the things that we do for you, Mr. or Mrs. Grower, that still have value and that we lean on? And that's what you should expect in how you interact with us. When you have that real alignment, you should have fewer exceptions and more standards in how you serve members in the organization. You should have boards that are far more comfortable with saying no. Because once you've done the hard work of saying, okay, this is how we segment our membership base, these are strategic profiles and groups, these are some of the trade-offs that we're going to make. Here's how we're going to support the folks that maybe are losing in the near term. And this is how we're going to operate to bring benefit to everybody over the long term. Along the way, we're going to say yes to some things and no, but it creates confidence and comfort at that board level for them to be able to reasonably and confidently say no, and then own that and defend that in the community. You'll also expect to see capital spending that's aligned with the future needs of your members. That'll be one of the quickest things that shows up, is all of a sudden capital allocation and deployment that reflects that segmentation work. And you should hold yourself accountable to this and hold each other accountable to the fact that have transparent communication about the trade-offs. When you've done the work, when you've really sat down and had those tough conversations and been very thoughtful about segmenting your membership and your customers, and you've thought about what do they expect, what do they need, what does the co-op need, how do we best serve them, what are the things we're not going to be able to do anymore? Once you've kind of gone through this, not as a bar napkin math exercise, but actually done the rigorous work, you'll be in a better position to defend those decisions. And when you can defend those decisions, typically you see a lot more transparent communications about it. What I often observe is when folks have less conviction and less comfort around the decisions that they felt compelled to make, they sometimes will bury those decisions in the communications. They won't hit them head on because they don't want to invite someone to ask questions. They don't want to invite the conflict. They don't want to have to defend something that they actually are not crystal clear yet on why they made that decision. But when you've done this work the right way, it'll give the confidence and conviction to be transparent in communications about those trade-offs, engage in discussions and debate, and defend them vigorously. So here's my closing challenge to you today. Remember that alignment isn't about keeping everyone happy. It's ultimately about keeping the co-op relevant. Keeping a relevant profitable, sustainable co-op, which is where we started the episode today, is the best thing that you can do to serve your members tomorrow, regardless of which segment you're optimizing for. If you don't have a co-op that is profitable, you are not going to earn the right to serve growers 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future. So yes, we need to talk about the challenge of profitability. That's one of the reasons that we do this work. We need to talk about responses to farm consolidation. That's one of the reasons we have to do this work. We have to talk about the big versus small debate. It's one of the biggest things that creates friction within the organization. But we ultimately also just need to operate some of these co-ops a little bit more like businesses. I don't think that operating this as a business with making these sort of tough analytical decisions violates the origin and the objective and the mission and vision of a co-op. I have several friends that work in the nonprofit sector in some larger metropolitan areas in the country. And one of them, who was an executive director for some time, said to me once, he was driving some change in their organization around how they structured themselves from a staffing standpoint, compensation, the way they assign job duties, the financial rigor in their planning. And, there was some pushback because people said, look, we're a mission-driven organization, right? We're a nonprofit. We're here to have an impact in the community. And he said, yes, I know, I understand that. But you have to understand that 501c3, with the nonprofit status with the Internal Revenue Service, 501c3 is a tax status, not a business model. It's the way that the government treats the net returns of the organization. Are they a taxable return or not? Are we looking to generate a long return or do we reinvest back in the business? Do we reallocate out to the community members we serve? The idea here is that a co-op has to still make decisions that allow it to earn the right to exist into the future. A complete 100% distribution of all net profits at the end of every year would kill a co-op in just several growing cycles. And we need to take that and extrapolate that a little bit and say, look, we must stay true to our goal of shared prosperity. But we have to think about the prosperity in terms of the growers that we are here in best position to serve. And that requires those trade-offs. So thank you, as always, for taking the time to tune in today. I hope that you found this relevant and helpful and actionable. If you have questions and want to continue the discussion, you can contact me using the links in the show notes. Next week, we're going to actually build upon this a little bit. We're going to talk about a sibling challenge to member fragmentation. And this is fragmentation and friction within multi-line co-ops themselves, among the different lines of business that exist within multi-line co-ops. It's got some of the same flavors, some different and unique constraints and challenges associated with it. But I think the more we talk about where alignment exists or doesn't exist within the co-ops, the better served these organizations will be. So we're going to talk about alignment among business lines and how they break down within a co-op. We'll talk about what does this do to your member segmentation and service levels, implication on capital allocation decisions, and ultimately how to remedy the issue. So again, thank you so much for tuning in today. I look forward to hearing your feedback and your thoughts and ideas on this topic. And I look forward to having you join us again next time, right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is the podcastfactory.com.